You are now watching Bleav. Do you believe?
Very excited to be joined now by Ryan Dyrud, host of the LA Football Show. He is here to help us break down everything Falcons Rams in week 2. Ryan, how you doing, man? Thanks for hopping on.
What's up, Will? Thanks for having me. Excited to talk Rams Falcons. Hopefully, I guess both teams kind of need to bounce back a little bit, but hopefully the Rams, being the Super Bowl defending champions, can look a little better than they did in week 1. So excited to get into it. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I would say that the Falcons definitely pose a little bit of a different threat than the Bills did, that's for sure. But it's exciting to rekindle an old NFC West rivalry. The Rams, I would say, have gone on to a bit more success than the Falcons since the NFC West days. But, you know, I want to start off with what's the level of concern in LA about kind of what we saw in week 1? Are people chalking that up to, well, you know, only 3 preseason games. It takes some time to really have everything click. The Rams defense, I think, looked great, and we'll get to that in a minute. Most of the problems were offensive. What is the level of concern after that first game?
Well, I think it depends if you ask fans or if you ask like myself, who covers the team. I'm not overly concerned. I mean, there was definitely some concerning things that happened, albeit the offensive line looked very shaky. You know, we knew when you lost Andrew Whitworth, future Hall of Famer, he wasn't going to be easily replaced just because you have a guy on the roster that they extended in Joe Noteboom, and he played well in Andrew Whitworth's stead. You knew he wasn't going to be Andrew Whitworth. You lose Austin Corbett. You draft his hopeful successor in Logan Bruss. Well, he is out for the season after an injury in training camp. So in steps Coleman Shelton, who basically has 0 starts to his name after being an undrafted free agent out of Washington. So the offensive line, you knew there was going to be question marks, and they showed those question marks on Thursday night. Now, the reason why I'm not overly concerned is because Buffalo, I think everyone would agree, has arguably the best defensive front in all of football. So they're going to give a lot of people fits. And so now we'll have to see how this Rams unit can progress and improve moving forward. And on top of that, you know, the running game never really got going. Cam Akers had the tune of 3 snaps total. Darrell Henderson, you know, did some decent things, but they never really committed to it. And then Stafford just looked off with his receivers. Allen Robinson, only 1 catch, the new shiny toy for Sean McVay. Yep. Cooper Kupp still looked like the best receiver in football, so that was kind of the one bright spot. But Stafford just never really looked comfortable. They could never get in a rhythm. The play calling looked a little off. And so, you know, to answer your question, not overly concerned about the team moving forward, but definitely saw some concerning things last Thursday that hopefully they'll get corrected this week against the Falcons, you know.
I'm really, really looking forward to, and after 1 week, I mean, I think there's a chance that we get it, like a Sosa McGuire type of race between Cooper Kupp and Justin Jefferson this season at receiver. I mean, man, both of those guys are so good. And, you know, after seeing what Michael Thomas did to the Falcons in the fourth quarter, what Jarvis Landry did sometimes, I'm a little bit anxious about the Cooper Kupp matchup for Atlanta. But you mentioned the Bills. You know, a lot of people do think that they have, if not the best defense, the best front 7. Atlanta looked like they could have a potentially good front 7, which is not anything that anybody thought they would hear 2 weeks ago. Because the Rams struggled so much kind of with protecting Matthew Stafford, and it looked like mostly 5-man fronts, we know that, you know, Matthew Stafford is comfortable kind of spreading it out, having many receivers on the field. Do you anticipate any adjustments from Sean McVay to, you know, help the 5 offensive linemen more so than he did on Thursday night? Or do you think they're going to kind of try to tweak this on the fly and maybe keep what they want to do and just hope that it improves with a little more, you know, usage?
You know, I'd like to see some adjustments, but I don't expect a ton. Unfortunately, you know, Buffalo got that pressure with 0 blitzes in the game either. Right. So that's also not a great stat you want to see. You know, the most sacks in the McVay era given up basically, and no blitzes happening, or at least in the McVay Stafford era. So, you know, I expect to do a little bit more, like maybe some chips, whether it be from the running back or a tight end on some routes. I think they'll really, you know, Sean McVay, what he has done a lot in terms of adjustments is kind of shorten the passing game with very quick kind of out routes and just get the ball out of Stafford's hand quickly. Because a lot of the plays last week, were just kind of like long developing plays that just took too long to to come to fruition. And I didn't see the in-game adjustments from McVay that I would have liked to have seen, knowing that they were getting the pressure, knowing that Stafford and the receivers just didn't totally seem in tune. And so they needed to do some quicker stuff, which I expect they will see a little bit this week. But McVay, as great as of a coach he is, as much as I respect him, I think he's a top 3 coach in the NFL. He definitely has that pride factor where he kind of gets, nope, this is going to work. It's worked in the past. We won a Super Bowl last year. We're sticking with it. And so I wouldn't expect a ton of huge adjustments, but I definitely think we'll see more chips from the running backs, more chips from the tight ends, and hopefully shorten things up in the passing game so it just doesn't take as long to develop things.
Yeah, I went back and I rewatched the Falcons Saints game. Specifically, I wanted to see what happened with their protection from kind of the first half to the second half when the Falcons were able to get to Jameis Winston 3 times in the first half, only once in the second half. And even that one time had similarities with the other times in the first half. And that is pretty much 5-man protection. They had Alvin Kamara in the backfield out of shotgun, but he went out on his route almost immediately. And I kind of think that the Rams typically like to do the same type of thing. They'll give you that one running back in the backfield look, but generally he's going to kind of go out sooner rather than later. What they did in the second half was start to keep Kamara in, even Mark Ingram more on passing downs to leave him in as a blocker. And then they got the tight ends involved, but they also did what I expect the Rams to do. Actually spread the field out, make the Falcons kind of declare if they were going to bring an extra guy or not, and then shorter passes. It just so happens that the Saints got the Falcons with several explosive passes, which they need to obviously clean up. But the Rams' weapons outside of Cooper Kupp, you kind of talked about that. You talked, about the running backs in particular. I think all fantasy players in America are pretty much aware that Darrell Henderson got 82% of the snaps for the running backs. But who else is out there for Matthew Stafford to rely on, be it a receiver, a tight end, or a running back not named Cooper Kupp?
Yeah, you hope Allen Robinson becomes that guy, which I mean, he had a phenomenal training camp. So it wasn't like, you knew it was going to take a few games, actual game. Because remember, like most teams nowadays, but the Rams don't play any starters in preseason. So,
right.
So yeah, they get reps in practice, reps in training camp. The connection looks great between Stafford and Robinson, but you knew it was going to take a little bit of time to really get acclimated. I mean, even Odell Beckham Jr.'s, first few games with the Rams, I think the first game, it finished with a tune of like 2 catches for 12 yards. So it's not like this new thing where a new receiver maybe doesn't get peppered right off the bat. Right. So Robinson, I think, will be that guy. Higbee's always been, Tyler Higbee, that is, the tight end, has always been a safety blanket for not just Stafford. You can date that back to the Jared Goff days. And, McVay does like to get his tight ends involved in the offense, especially what's funny, Will, if you look at the Rams over the McVay's tenure, tight end usage weeks 1 through 7 is much higher than on the rest of the season. So I would expect
Why do you think that
Higbee. I think it's got to be something to do with defenses, maybe keying in on it more. It could be more with the diversity of, spreading the football around to different receivers and whatnot, and just not needing to rely on the tight end as much.
Yeah.
So I don't have a pinpoint answer, but I think it's a little bit of combination of that. But I would expect Higbee to be used again in this game quite a bit. I mean, they only have 2 tight ends on the entire roster, which is very low for most NFL teams. But Higbee, plays in line, plays outside. You can spread him out, does it all. So, and then in terms of running backs, I mean, Kyron Williams, the young rookie at Notre Dame, unfortunately, he's going on IR. So it's Cam Akers is going to have to get more usage. And here's the thing that fantasy owners will hate, and why I've said I'm not a expert fantasy. I'm in too many damn leagues. I think I'm in like 5 leagues. But
Same
I told
here,
everyone
man.
this.
It's rough.
It's too much. It's way too
so
many.
much.
I can't say no. But what I told everyone, I'm like, take this for what you want in terms of, like I said, not a fantasy expert, but covering the Rams, stay away from the Rams backfield, period. Because I can almost guarantee now this week, Cam Akers will be your lead back and we'll probably get 80% of the touches, and everyone's going to lose their minds again. Because like, well, what about Darrell Henderson? So I think we'll see a bigger usage out of Cam Akers to help in that passing game as well for Stafford.
See, you say that Sean McVay sticks to his guns, that he's got an ego, and he's just out here copying Kyle Shanahan. What is this about?
When it comes to running backs, yeah, you're not wrong. Once Todd Gurley was gone, it's just been this roller coaster of running backs.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. Well, we've got Cordero Patterson, so I shouldn't complain, I guess, anymore. Because damn, he looks good.
Yeah, got him on fantasy too, so I was happy about that.
There you go. Before we get to kind of the Falcons offense against the Rams defense, I want to finish up on LA's offense with Matthew Stafford. obviously the 4 picks, not all of them were his fault. Obviously some tip passes, things like that. But what is with the elbow kind of rumors in camp, all of that talk? Do people expect him to kind of be the Matthew Stafford of last year eventually? And if so, how soon? Or is the expectation that he's 100% right now and that, Thursday night was maybe just a little bit of a fluke game?
Yeah, the expectation is 100%. I mean, the team said that. He said that. We can speculate all you want, but we have to trust the player and the organization. Right. And both have said, nope, not an issue. It was an off-season thing. But anytime he has a game like that, it's going to come up, obviously. But what I kind of remind people is back in November of last year, the Rams didn't win a game. They went winless in November. Stafford threw, I think, 9 interceptions in that month. Looked very, very bad, very off, sacked a lot, and they ended up winning the Super Bowl, 2 months later. So I think it was more of just a bad game all around, bad play calling, like just a bad game period from the offense, the rush, the O-line, Stafford, the receivers, again, outside of Cooper Kupp. So I from what I saw watching the game, watching film, even some of his missed throws, overthrows, it didn't look like an elbow issue to me. It looked more of just whether it was timing, whether it was nerves, whether it was just Buffalo's got a damn good defense and they were in his face all day, which is probably the biggest factor of it all. So at this point, I'm not willing to say any concern about his elbow, but anytime a game comes up, it's going to get mentioned. So we'll obviously have to talk about it basically for the next 17 weeks.
Yeah, that's true. Good luck with that.
Yeah, thanks. I know we had it with Todd Gurley and his knee 2 years ago, and now we get it with Stafford's elbow. It never ends.
Those are my least favorite stories. It's like, all right, he's going to play through it, and yeah, it's probably going to hurt, but
yeah,
that's all they're going to say. They're not going to say anything yet. Yeah. LA's defense. It obviously Raheem Morris is there. Big fan of him. Have fond memories of his time in Atlanta. But the thing that jumped out to me the most in that Thursday night game was LA's defense. I was like, these guys seem like a Georgia defense, an Alabama defense, like a college defense with the way they were flying around the ball, like the attitude that was almost borderline on like impetuous and rude and just like, I was almost surprised that they didn't get called for penalties at some point. But then at the end of the day, they also give up 31 points and are on the wrong side of the score. How do you kind of fit those two pieces together?
Yeah, I mean, Raheem Morris, love him as a coach. I think he'll be a head coach here sooner than later, but he definitely has instilled a culture out here in LA and a dog mentality. I mean, Coach Henderson, the defensive line coach, he has the dog work slogan that he has shirts made for it. And that's what the defensive line, kind of their mantra is, that dog work. So it's kind of now blossomed out to the entire defense. They definitely have that culture, and usually they can back it up. Now against Josh Allen and company, they weren't able to. Part of it was, being on the wrong side of some Matthew Stafford turnovers. And so they were given short fields. But, in reality, after those first few drives, and I thought they settled down a little bit outside of Jalen Ramsey. That was kind of the big bummer issue, whatever you want to call it. Arguably the best corner in football. And now in 4 straight games dating back to the last playoffs, he has not looked like the best corner in football. Giving up a lot of yards. Granted, played really good receivers, but when you're the best in the business, you're supposed to lock down those good receivers. And when you see Mike Evans going over 100, Deebo Samuel going over 100, Jamar Chase going over 100, now Stephon Diggs going well over 100 and 2 touchdowns and burning him down the sidelines, that was almost the bigger storyline to me than the overall defense. Because I thought overall the defensive line looked pretty good. Bobby Wagner looked good in his first game as a Ram. Ernest Jones is a bright young linebacker who they're very excited about. I thought the safeties looked good. Nick Scott, who's been kind of the unsung hero after taking over as a starter last year. And the other corners overall, I thought played decent. So I think the unit itself is going to be fine. Like I said, they have that culture. I think they have the talent. Really, it's going to come down to Jalen Ramsey, and if he is still that island-type corner that can shut guys down, or they're going to have to switch to a more zone-heavy scheme that gives him some help over the top because they can't rely on him to just lock down the best receiver in football, which we'll see next week, who I think is the best rookie receiver in football, former USC Trojan Drake London.
So do you think that Jalen Ramsey would be matched up on Drake London? Because we just saw Marshawn Lattimore, the Saints' top corner, kind of in that same, maybe if not the top tier, your Jair Alexanders, your, formerly Jalen Ramsey's, those types of guys, probably in that second tier, covered Kyle Pitts for most of the game. Obviously, Kyle Pitts did not have, a huge outing, 2 catches, I believe 19 yards. Drake London, on the other hand, did have a pretty big game and kind of looked like he could be that Falcons lead receiver if needed. Do you think, we know that Jalen Ramsey does not mind moving all over the field, covering whoever, going inside, outside. Which do you think should be the bigger priority for LA to slow down, Drake London or Kyle Pitts?
I mean, that's a great question. I would not necessarily saying this because of priority, but I would expect Jalen to be more on Drake London. When you have a Bobby Wagner and you have a Jordan Fuller as your safety, I expect those duo to kind of take the tight end position more and try to take away Kyle Pitts. So I would expect Jalen Ramsey. He can play wherever. He plays the star, the money positions. He definitely can play in the slot, but typically he's been his best on the outside, which I think would be, shadowing a guy like Drake London, who as I said before, I love, he was so good at SC. To me, he was wide receiver 1 in this draft, and hopefully he'll really blossom Atlanta, but it'll be interesting to see how that matchup is in his return to Los Angeles.
Which Falcon is the most likely to be picked up by Aaron Donald at some point during this game if a fight breaks out?
Oh man, probably Cordell Patterson, right? Yeah, I would think, just because he'll get the
He's
most
just going to
touches.
stick with the running backs. That's just his thing, is find the nearest running back and pick him up.
I think so. I mean, it's if you get 20 touches, it's the most likely, right?
All right, good. You passed that test. So do you guys think that with Jalen Ramsey specifically, like you mentioned that it's dating back a few games into the playoffs, has there been any sense as to why maybe it's just fallen? Is it a slump? Is it kind of he's always had this attitude, right? So I don't want to say that he's finally started to like feel himself too much or whatever, but he just frankly looks not like Jalen Ramsey at times on Thursday. I mean, that long touchdown pass that he gave up, it looked like maybe he was trying to bait the throw and then catch back up to it and intercept it. But, that's not a risk I necessarily think you take when you're trying to break a slump. So what's going on there?
It's a great question. And yeah, it definitely doesn't have to do with the attitude. He's been like that his whole career. You know, you could point to a number of things. You look at even some of the greatest corners ever, Darrelle Revis, Deion Sanders, like a lot of them, when they hit 29, 30, you start to see a little decline. Jalen Ramsey turns 29 this year. So, I mean, you could maybe say it's something to do with that. Schematically, there hasn't been a lot of changes. He's always, since he's been here, he's been that island guy where he hasn't needed safety help over the top. That play specifically with Diggs, it looked like at first it was like a blown coverage by the safety and they were supposed to have the back end. But then when you see Jalen Ramsey not get upset at all at anyone, no, that was on him, because he would be the first to be like, where were you? Like, that was your responsibility. And he basically just put his head down like, whoops, that was me.
Casey Hayward had like a very similar play in the game against Atlanta. It's the Jarvis Landry play on the final drive for New Orleans that kind of moves them in position to kick that field goal, where, you maybe think that it's a cover 2 and the safety is going to get that deep half, but then you realize that no, it's man, and he's just letting him get a head start to then kind of again undercut this throw and maybe make a play. Like, both of those plays were so similar to me and just so interesting, because I was trying to figure out what exactly was the goal here.
Yeah, I mean, I know there was that article that he came out and called Josh Allen a bad pick and a trash quarterback. So maybe he was trying to put that on display, that he didn't think he could throw it there. I don't think he believes that anymore, though, obviously, because of what Josh Allen's done. But there's not one thing I can pinpoint on, because he was nursing a little bit of I wouldn't say injury, but he didn't play a lot during training camp, came back kind of late. So maybe it was just some rust shaking off, but I don't know. I mean, it's never good when the best corner in football all of a sudden does not look like a top 5 corner in football. So especially because of the way their secondary is built, it's required of him to really be that top tier guy, or else they got to change a lot of stuff up, just because they don't necessarily have the talent as their corner 2, their corner 3. They haven't got good players, but he elevates them and makes them better when he is Jalen Ramsey. When he's not, you see the youth, you see the unprovenness in guys like Robert Rochelle, David Long Jr., and guys that they drafted this year. Like, you'll see that more on display if Jalen Ramsey is not Jalen Ramsey. So I don't know, Will, like what to pinpoint as, if it's age, if it is cockiness, or if it's just mental mistakes, which that one looked like. But hopefully he gets it cleaned up soon. Otherwise, this defense could be in some trouble. Yeah,
maybe it's just a slump, Sometimes players just go through some rough times. But
I hope.
Another thing is, I was going back and rewatching the Rams Bills game and the Falcons Saints game, Atlanta did a really good job, I think, of neutralizing New Orleans' defensive line, which I consider to be, very good, kind of on the level of Buffalo and LA. But I kind of can't help but thinking that LA is going to be much better prepared than New Orleans was because they just played a mobile quarterback. And one of the things that I don't think New Orleans was necessarily 100% prepared for was just how different Atlanta's offense would look with Marcus Mariota behind quarterback and not Matt Ryan. And that muscle memory of playing Matt Ryan twice a year for, a decade is probably ingrained in Cam Jordan. And they really got the best of a defensive line. But how beneficial do you think it will be for the Rams defense, just having seen some of these kind of like read option looks from Josh Allen, some of these, motions where somebody's going back could potentially be an option candidate, things like that we saw Atlanta run against New Orleans. I mean, is that really going to be in LA's favor that they just kind of saw something similar?
I mean, I think it helps. I still think every offense has its own, intricacies and wrinkles and stuff of that nature. And obviously Arthur Smith being, former OC for quite some time and tight end coach and whatnot. I think they'll definitely benefit from seeing it, but I think it's still a brand new offense to them, right? It's still,
right.
They haven't really, even when they played, Tennessee last year, there was wrinkles of the Arthur Smith offense, but he obviously was the head coach of Atlanta. So it's still, maybe they'll take some of that film too, which they did not play well against and kind of stack that on what they did last week. And obviously what Atlanta did all last season and this year, but obviously the offense looks different this year than last year because of the change of quarterback. So I think the advantage is still in Atlanta's favor and your guys' favor, just because of the newness of it, the newness of the quarterback and whatnot. Now, whether or not Marcus Mariota can run it sufficiently against a guy like Aaron Donald and against these linebackers and Bobby Wagner and hopefully Jalen Ramsey, we'll see. But yeah, I think they get a little benefit of it, but I think it's different enough where it's still new film study. It's still new work. It's still going to take a long, hard look at something very different than what they saw, Thursday night.
Yeah, that's fair. And I mean, Buffalo's offense also kind of mirrors more LA's and New Orleans a little bit, where they do like to be in shotgun, 4 wide outs, things like that. Arthur Smith's is almost, kind of more like Baltimore's, where it's condensed, it's tight. They've got a lot of, backs or tight ends moving around. So it is, mobility at the quarterback position, but maybe that's where the similarities end there. Let's get into a couple of just X factors, final thoughts, things like that for the game. Who's somebody for LA that we have not really talked about who may not necessarily be a household name? Like Kyren Williams may have been a great example of a player that I'm looking for who we don't know much about, but could make a big impact on Sunday.
Well, I'll start with one that you for sure won't know. No one will know, but Brian Allen, starting center, also injured in that last game, so he will be out. So you have Coleman Shelton, who I mentioned earlier, who took over at guard because of the injured Logan Bruss. He's actually going to slide over and play center now. And Trayman Ankrum, formerly a 7th-round pick out of Clemson, will now be your starting guard for the Rams. So an offensive line that already looked bad now has 2 new set pieces because of more injuries. So definitely a key factor there that isn't as exciting for listeners, but I mean, that's a big deal when you now have a backup guard who became a starting guard now is your starting center, and a 3rd string guard is now your starting guard. So that's one definitely to start with.
That's huge.
Yeah. So, other than that, offensively, Tutu Atwell's a guy that, Rams fan are probably sick of hearing his name, but he was the second, their first pick last year in the 2nd round. Small dude, small frame. Maybe guys in Atlanta know him well. He played at Louisville, so over there on the East Coast. But we've talked a lot about him throughout training camp because he's shown a lot of growth in his route tree. His route running, his catching ability has gotten better. He's healthy, but didn't see him used at all in that week 1 matchup. So I think he's a guy that really we can see maybe open things up if Matthew Stafford has enough time, that is, but can open things up. And maybe because they didn't push the ball down the field much at all against the Bills. And he's a guy that they drafted specifically for that reason. So if you want to see some pressure taken off Stafford and Kupp, Tutu Atwell's a guy that, wide receiver 4, wide receiver 5 even, but is a guy that could really make 2 or 3 impact plays that can benefit the offense. So I'll go with those kind of 2 guys that probably don't not a lot of shine, but they could actually have an effect on this game.
Yeah, I remember Tutu Atwell from the draft class last year. Yeah, obviously Louisville. He is tiny. You mentioned that. He is tiny dude. He's like a little road runner. out there.
Yeah. How big are you? What's your height?
What measurables? We want to talk measurables.
We're talking
6'2".
measurables. Tell the tape.
6'2".
Okay,
Although I've been told by everybody that I met post COVID, only online when I've met them in person, Ovi included, Ovi Mihaly, my show partner. First thing he said was like, "You're tall. You're taller than I thought." So I give off like, short king energy, I guess, over the microphone. But no, I'm tall, everybody.
Okay. Well, there you go. Well, I am not. So I'm Tutu Atwell's size. I'm about 5'7". So
there you go.
Tells you all you need to know. Yeah.
All right. Well, well, if we see you out there on the field in shoulder pads, we'll know something went wrong. They need Tutu fill in.
Yeah.
What part of this match?
I run a slower 40, unfortunately. So.
All right, we'll keep that between us, though. What part of this matchup do you think either the Rams coaching staff is worried about, or that you think they should be worried about?
I mean, I think that you kind of mentioned it earlier, but the Atlanta's front seven, how they looked, fairly suitable and fairly formidable against New Orleans. I think when I was looking at the schedule, and because that's been, a concern all offseason, is how is this offensive line going to react after the departures from last season and the injuries and whatnot. And so I looked at the schedule and I was like, okay, well, week 2, should be okay against that. And now seeing some of those guys play, it's like, well, it doesn't get easier. I mean, you go from the Bills to what you thought was going to be an easier matchup. No disrespect intended, but and it may not. So I think that's really what I'm going to look to. If you're the coaching staff of the Rams and you want to have success in this game, I mean, you're going to have to give Stafford time. The offensive line is going to have to play better than it did last week. And so that's definitely, I think, what's keeping Sean McVay and others up, and what Sean McVay will have to do in his play calling, because if it's not going well, it's going to be up to him to adjust and do things differently, because you can't just pull a starting left tackle or a starting right guard out of the stands. So they're stuck with who they got, at least for another week. And so it's going to be up to him in the play calling to really kind of neutralize some of that pass rush, neutralize some of those backers, and be able to kind of create some open space and some throwing lanes for Stafford and get the ball out of his hands quickly. So that's really, I think, what their biggest concern would be about facing this Falcons team and what they're going to really have to address on Sunday.
Historically, because I know every single year is a little bit of a different team. And so it's, hard to kind of compare what I'm about to ask you year over year. But last year, how good were the Rams at kind of overcoming setbacks offensively? And how good have McVay's offenses been, when you get it's 2nd and 3 and then you get a false start. Now all of a sudden it's 2nd and 13, like how good are they generally with Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay together at kind of keeping offensive drives going in the face of adversity?
That's a really good question. It's interesting, Will, because I feel like it's game by game. You can't really even look at the entire era. Like
and that's probably 100% true, by the way. It probably is game by game.
Yeah, I mean, that's a cop-out answer, obviously, but but you watch certain games of this team, and it's like if they struggle early in adversity, I mean, game over, chalk it up. I mean, I remember talking about the Tennessee game. I was at that game, and they fall down early with a pick six, a Matt Stafford pick six, and since that point, it's like the offense could do nothing. Like any adversity at all, it was either a turnover or a punt. They couldn't get out of their own way. And then games when things are going right, it's just like it's clicking on all cylinders. So they don't do well, I'll say, in adversity, in-game situations. Now, they've done well in season to make adjustments. And obviously, like I mentioned last year, going 0 in November and then winning the Super Bowl, that shows you the type of coaching and the type of adjustments and the type of talent this team has. But when they hit those roadblocks in the game, it seems like they just can't get out of their own way. And maybe that's something that I talked a lot on my show last year about, Matthew Stafford, whether you agree with this or not, this is just my opinion, as great as a quarterback as I think he is and many think he is, in Detroit, he had to really play hero ball a lot because of what the organization gave him, because of situations he was in. And so it forced him to force things, to take on that hero mentality. And last year in LA, we saw him do that a lot when he didn't have to, because he's got the talent around him. He's got the defense to back him up. He had the receivers, he had the running back. And so hopefully this year now, we'll see that improve, where if they do hit that adversity, he's like, you know what? I just need to do my job, hit Cooper Kupp 10 times out of 11, and we'll be okay. Like, that's all I need to do. And we saw that in the Super Bowl, right? We saw that against the Niners. They dropped down 10 points to the Niners in the NFC Championship game. He stayed calm. They came back. We saw them have some adversity in the Super Bowl. they fall down, they lose Odell Beckham Jr., they're losing the game, they have that game-winning drive. So I think we saw that improve, but it definitely, your question was game by game during the season, but hopefully now we'll see them kind of the maturation of Stafford within this offense, within this scheme of being able to, set aside those small roadblocks on 2nd and 3 false starts and kind of improve play by play instead of game by game.
Yeah, learn to kind of play within the offense a little bit more and facilitate when needed. That all makes perfect sense. Honestly, the reason that I asked that question is because the main note that I kind of wrote watching the Falcons Saints game for the first time, I think Atlanta's offense is really beautiful and really, really difficult to defend when it is in momentum, when it is in sync and on schedule. When things are flowing, it's like Arthur Smith can kind of dial up anything and have it work. But I just noticed that the few times, and this is probably true of most teams not named like the Chiefs or, maybe Arizona or some of the more explosive teams around the league. But when you have to march down the field and put together a 12 to 14 play drive to score, which I think Atlanta has to do because of the limitations of some of the explosive, skill players that they have, but maybe the quarterback is like, it's just not all there yet. I don't know if Atlanta is good enough to overcome the second down run that gets stuffed in the backfield for a 2-yard loss. I don't know if they're good enough to overcome, a first down play that gets no yards, right? So for that reason, and this is my lead in to kind of asking how you think, your final thoughts on how this game could go. My prediction is that this is going to be a little bit of an ugly kind of defensive slog, a little bit maybe like what we saw against the Bills, but instead of the Bills, looking like a playoff team and just putting up 31 points anyway, like this could be a 20-16 game and just, not necessarily the prettiest football, but great defensive football. And, whichever team can kind of make that play. Now, having said that, it could be 28-32 and be an offensive shootout. But I just kind of think that the defenses right now, based on what we saw in week 1, have the advantage in my mind.
Yeah. I don't necessarily disagree with that. I do think, and again, the injuries hurt on the Rams offensive line, but I do think we'll see the Rams offense really put together a much better game. It's kind of like one of those, you feel bad after you get a beat down of that for the next opponent because John McVay, Matt, they're going to dial things up. They had much longer time to prepare having the early Thursday game.
True.
So, I don't disagree with you, but I also think, I think the Rams could win this one fairly big as well, just because of how bad they were week 1 and having to come out and prove themselves and kind of leave it all out there and be like, look, we are still the champs, or we're the defending champs, and this is why. And we just had a really poor week 1 performance, but we're back and we're here to stay. So, but we'll see. It's going to be interesting.
This is what's always so hard. It's almost like week 2 is secretly harder than week 1 if you're trying to cover a team because you've only had one taste. But you guys played the Bills. The Bills are a very popular pick to win the Super Bowl this year, and they looked like a team that could easily win the Super Bowl this year. Yep. Y'all may bounce back and absolutely crush Atlanta 35-17, and we'll say, all right, they lost to the Bills. Matthew Stafford had 4 picks. Like, it happens. On the flip side, Atlanta looked easily like the best team for 2.5 quarters against New Orleans and lost in a way that's outside of Atlanta, not easy to replicate. But they may turn around, and I would not be totally shocked if Atlanta beats LA on the road. And now we're sitting here being like, did we underestimate? Like, they did some real things in the trenches, going back and rewatching that Saints game that, yes, everybody, and, on this podcast included, our first takeaway was, how are we doing this again? Why is this always happening in Atlanta? What is wrong? Something's fundamentally broken here. I'm starting to think that's not the case because they really, really did some very good football things at a core level. So I think that this game actually is going to be surprising to a casual NFL fan who doesn't have really much invested in either of these two teams, because the Rams looked a little sloppy on Thursday Night Football and the Falcons aren't expected to do much of anything and ended up losing in week 1. But I could see this being a great game. So Ryan, do you have any final thoughts on the matchup before I let you get out of here?
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. I agree. I'm bummed. I was supposed to be at the game. I had plans to go, and now I have to travel. So I'll actually be on a plane coming back to LA during the game, unfortunately. Damn. But yeah, it's going to be a fun one. I think would not be shocked at all if it's close. But I'll stick with my original thought, which a few days ago, which I think the Rams end up winning this one like 31-14 or something like that. And that sounds shade. That sounds like I'm throwing
So
shade.
you think the spread is correct? You would take the Rams. I think it's like what, -11 was what it opened.
Oh wow! Did they open it that much? I hate when they do that.
It's like the biggest line of the weekend.
Oh wow! I didn't even look at that, but yeah, I'll stick with. I think they win by two touchdowns. So I think Allen Robinson has 5 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp is still Cooper Kupp. I think Cam Akers gets going a little bit more. So I think it has definitely the makings of a fun, exciting game. But I think the Rams offense will show up in 2022 finally, and we'll kind of see it on display. But it should be a fun one.
It would not shock me if Allen Robinson has a big game. Definitely, I'm surprised AJ Terrell struggled a little bit in his first game, so I'm really curious to see what he looks like with Cooper Kupp and how they even try to defend Cooper Kupp, frankly, because he's kind of indefensible. Like, I have no idea what to do with that guy. But maybe they take a Patriots approach, and they're like, Cooper Kupp, go for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns, and we're going to win 24-21. So I think the Falcons will keep it close. I would, if I was a betting man, I'm not. Bet Online though, great partners. I'd probably put my money on the Falcons because I think it will be, again, surprisingly close. I'm going to, just for the sake of putting a number, 28-24 LA. But
there you go.
I think it'll be a good game. Ryan Dyrud, thank you so much for taking the time to come on and break down the matchup. Once again, everybody can find him on the LA Football Show. So anybody want any more coverage of the Rams and the lead up to this game, please go check out Ryan's show and all the great stuff that he does. Ryan, thanks again, man.